right, welcome to Beyond the Deal podcast. I am Jill Yahnite, your host, and today I have Charlie Skinner here with me. He is the owner of Infinite Vision and also DOS Peacekeeper, DAS, right? DOS Peacekeeper, which is a newer company, but Infinite Vision is a longer standing company since 2010, and that is a outsourced product development company, right? Welcome to the show, Charlie. Thank you for being a guest.
Sounds good. I'd be happy to. So my name is Charlie Skinner, and I'm the founder of Infinite Vision. Infinite Vision is a medical and biotech product development company, and we specialize in optics and illumination. We have a full complement of engineering personnel, from mechanical to electrical and optical engineering people. We did start the company in May of 2010. We do a lot of business with companies such as Carl Zeiss Meditech and Carl Zeiss X-Ray, and we're essentially engineering personnel for hire. We can handle individual contributors on a big project or a small project, as well as we can take over a whole project from concept all the way through release to manufacturing. My background includes different small and big companies. I've worked for some large companies in a capacity of sales and sales management to the executive level in some of the companies that I've worked for, as well as managing operations, engineering, sales, inside sales, outside sales, as well as all the marketing departments as well. So I have a pretty broad range of experience through the corporate world over the years. I founded another company that you mentioned, that's Defense Audio Systems, and it's a company where we use the senses to drive our objectives, which is to prevent crime and to reduce mayhem if there's a situation such as January 6th. We're trying to send people away without arresting them or hurting them. It's a pretty unique little company. Most of the IP is protected in that we're under development, and I can't talk too much about it yet, but it's pretty exciting, and it utilizes a lot of the same team that I have for Infinite Vision, which is to our advantage. But yeah, that's pretty much it from 50,000 feet, Jill.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the overview. And obviously from your bio and the overview that you gave, you have a longstanding history of leading teams, and your company, obviously, the topic that I wanted to talk about today is really at the heart of it is account management. You and I had a very lengthy conversation about our perspective on account management and see it very much the same way. And, so I want to get your perspective about sales and account management. And those two segments of the business, or those two people within the business, typically business owners look at them in different ways. And I want to get your perspective. Just let's talk high level, how you've seen it in different companies, just overall, right? Let's just start there.
That sounds good, Jill. So I think that a couple of things that we talked about in our previous discussions was how do we manage account penetration, and from there, what happens with the salesperson? Do they go and find new accounts? Are they responsible for developing more business within an organization? And obviously that's a moving target, right? If it's a small company and a salesperson penetrates that account and business begins, that's different than a company that has multiple divisions and multiple platforms and multiple groups of people that are developing products for that organization. So in my experience, Jill, I think that and what my preference is to hire salespeople that are quite capable of managing things, not only from a sales perspective, but from a technical aspect as well. And my opinion is when a salesperson is calling on a new account in particular, it's really important that they establish that they are not just there to do a sales pitch, but rather they're representing themselves, and then they're representing the company that they work for. And when they are introducing themselves, they're introducing their company as well. And I think that it's important that relationship, that trust is being built on the front end. I think it's important that that individual stays involved in the relationship, just because it is what is being presented on the front end. So if it's a salesperson that understands that relationship building is really important, and that they're representing the company that they work for, any commitment that they make on the front end as a salesperson, they're going to want to make sure that the company they work for is adhering to those commitments. And if they're really just a sales guy to get the front door open, they'll say or do anything, and it doesn't really matter from them, because they're off to the races to the next company. Their obligation isn't personal any longer. So if I penetrate an account and I'm discussing what my company can do, and I'm responsible for making sure that truth that I'm telling to them is adhered to by the organization I work for, that involvement is actually good for everyone. And I think that it's important to the relationship and the trust that can be built between a client and a company in which the salesperson is representing.
So many times when I work with business owners, and I'm sure you have experienced this over the years, there is this struggle in a couple different ways, right? One is they struggle with, you mentioned having the technical abilities to have that technical conversation. Sometimes an industry is so tight that it is difficult to find that business development professional that has that acumen to be able to have those technical conversations. So the company will go in the direction of, let me hire a business development person that knows how to sell, and I'll bring in the sales engineer, right? And if it's a big project, we will have a project manager that manages that project. And in my perspective, there are those old school conversations of, that hunter and that farmer, right? And I think that in this day and age, it has morphed a lot, especially when you're talking the SMB marketplace, in that, to your point, you open the door. So in some ways, you're that old school hunter, but you're making promises on behalf of the company. You're maybe bringing in that engineer that has the technical skills to explain a technical product, or developing that proposal that has to be very technical in that way. But in my philosophy, keeping that business development person engaged within that account, especially when it's a larger account. Now, truly, if it's a smaller account, arguments can be made that maybe that person doesn't stay as tight with that account. But when it's a larger account, I always hear this argument that, no, that person is a hunter. They just need to go and get the next new piece of business. I have a project manager. I have an account manager that I've hired. They're going to take care of that piece of business. Talk to me about how in your company, and how you built your company over the last 15 years, that very different philosophy, and how you have structured that, and the benefit that you've gotten from that.
That's a great point. So if you have an organization and you say the account is Hewlett Packard, and you really want to penetrate that account, so you hire someone, or you have your best salesperson working on that account, and they do everything they can, they penetrate the account, and then they've done a great job. You're in. And if they're not as technical as you'd like them to be, then they need to be accompanied by a field applications engineering person. Now, if you didn't need the salesperson, the field applications engineering guy would be the guy that would just penetrate the account, and all ships will rise and everything's great. But we all know that the field applications guy isn't that guy. So if you have an account like Hewlett Packard, and you've penetrated that account, The field applications guy is involved now. All the technical things are happening. All the work is, the important things are being done. Well, Hewlett Packard must have 100 divisions, right? So getting qualified at a company like that is really very difficult. And if you take your hunter
Right.
away from Hewlett Packard and say, okay, I want you to go and work and get me into Cisco now. Well, he's starting all over again. And what you're doing is you're just leaving huge amounts of revenue and opportunity on the table, because really the best way to expand your business is by penetrating further into an account such as Hewlett Packard. So if I go to Hewlett Packard in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I do a great job there, I'm going to be able to go to Exeter, New Hampshire and say, hey, I'm qualified in Fort Collins, Colorado. We're doing a great job for them. We're also involved in San Jose. We have these things going on. And the doors start magically opening. Because ultimately, companies like this, they want to reduce their supplier base. They don't want to deal with a company that's just dealing with one division. So if you can have a salesperson that knows how to penetrate multiple divisions and leverage that initial approval, then that is much better than having that person off and spinning his wheels and possibly failing to penetrate new opportunities over and over and over. So in my experience, my salespeople have always, what I've instructed them to do is to penetrate as deeply as possible into a handful of targeted accounts, rather than, here's your account base. You have 5 primaries, you have 10 secondaries, and then maybe 30 of other accounts that you are going to play with and see if you can get some movement on. And if they could move, that list is always changing. But I think that is,
Right.
That's how I've always managed it, and it's worked very, very well.
So in that scenario, right, you would have still a project manager in that particular division, in this example, in Colorado for HP. And really, I mean, the difference is, what I have found is that if that business development person goes away, right, because they have the skills to open doors, that project manager, or sometimes they get called account manager, they don't necessarily have the skills to ask for that introduction in New Jersey or in that different division.
That's right.
Right? And what I have also seen, and I'm sure you've seen it too, is certain divisions, the leaders get really sensitive about their project manager or their account manager staying with them. And they don't want to share that
That's right.
person.
That's right.
Have you ever had that experience?
Definitely. I mean, if that relationship that you're talking about, that's coveted by your client. They don't want disruption. If things are starting to go well, and that project manager or that field applications engineering guy or lady is doing a great job, the last thing they want is that person jetting off into the sunset to try and penetrate other accounts. That's a big mistake.
Right.
You want to capitalize on the opportunity that you have, so that you can use that not only to satisfy it, but also as a reference. You want to be able to use that referral to penetrate other accounts. And there's nothing better than an organization within a company as a reference to penetrate deeper into an organization. So I agree with you on that.
Right.
I think it's important to keep that uniformity and that singularity of that person that's helping a particular project or organization.
Now, I think that one thing that happens is that company or that relationship, right? What people don't sometimes realize is they're not going to come forward and say, oh no, I'm not going to introduce you because I don't want to lose
Right.
Susie, right? It's inherent, right? Sometimes in human
Yes.
nature that they're scared that they don't want to lose that really good resource that they have found that is, such a great partner to theirs, but they're not going to really come out and admit that, right? So I think it's one of those nuances that sometimes doesn't get acknowledged, but is truly there, right? Where if you still have that business development person there, they can assure that person, look, we have another account manager, another project manager that is in that local area that is just as good as Susie, that will take care of this other
That's
department,
right.
right? So Susie is still your project manager on this
That's right.
project, which
In,
yeah.
in a scenario like that too,
So
Jill, you know, the project manager that's working in an organization like that and satisfying the hierarchy, they're satisfying the person that they're working for, that is the project manager within the company. You don't want to go over that person's head, right? But the salesperson
right,
can. The salesperson can bring in his or her VP and say, "Hey, here, let's penetrate deeper." And then that person isn't going to be disrupted by that. They're not. That's not going to bother them. So you can actually go right over the top
right,
of them without them being threatened. If it's the salesperson or the field, it's not that the resource that they're depending on isn't getting pulled from them. And so that you don't want to be that can't become a ceiling for you. That project and that work that you have to
yeah,
make sure it doesn't become a ceiling. And you can't
yeah.
you can't be limited by an individual's hierarchy within an organization. That's very limiting, and that defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah, I think that I have seen where it has happened that because you do such a great job for that division, sometimes that leader wants to introduce you to their
Right, right,
manager, right? Which controls many other
right,
departments, right? Which is a great
right.
opportunity. Here's the other thing that you kind of touched on, and that is having that business development person there also is that out, if you will, if a project is going
Mm-hmm.
astray. It is the way that that client always has that communication back to the company that, hey, something's not, and I've had this happen where, uh, the business development person gets that communication off to the side of, hey, this isn't really going the way that you had promised us or you had intended in the
Mm-hmm.
timeline or whatever
Right,
that be. Can you help me to get this back on
right.
schedule? And the business development person can then go internally to find out, hey, what's going on? Are we behind? Do we need to, that kind of thing. So that's from the client side. But then also internally, I have seen where scope creep
Mm-hmm.
happens. And sometimes it's very hard for that project manager to go forward to the client and ask for more money. But if they go to the business development person, that becomes the business development person's problem to, and conversation really, to go back to the original signer of the contract, if you will, and say, hey, we remember how we signed these things and this is actually how it's changed. And so we need to create an
Right.
addendum or those kind of things. And it's not the project manager always that's having to ask for
Mm-hmm.
more money. So I don't know if you've had
Oh,
those kind of
definitely,
situations
definitely.
happen.
So I think that's such a great point, and it's important that in my world that the salesperson stays involved. So if, as an example, if you're experiencing scope creep, the salesperson better know that, right? Because you can, so many relationships get destroyed because of scope creep, but scope creep really is an
Yeah.
opportunity, right? So say that you're merrily going down the road and you discover that you need another 30% budget, right? Well, the time to talk about that is
Yeah.
immediately, and there's no way that the project manager is equipped for that, at least in my world. So you want to make sure that your
Yeah.
salesperson is involved all the time. And every single week, if there are design reviews or there are reviews on the project or how it's going, the salesperson, even if they're just sitting there, needs to be included in that so that they're not surprised. If the lady
Right.
that's in charge of the project at your client is approaching the salesperson and it's the first time the salesperson's heard of this issue, that's not good, right? So we want to make sure
Right.
that the salesperson stays involved, and when there is scope creep or there is a budget bloat or things are going to get pushed out or late, whatever the case may be, that's the salesperson's job. And if the salesperson doesn't know that,
Yeah.
if they're not inquisitive And if they're not working within their organization to make sure that the commitments that they've made are being adhered to, they shouldn't have to be told to do that. I would expect my salespeople to stay involved and to understand that what they've committed to is being adhered to. And because it's their reputation, a salesperson only has their reputation. And so if their reputation is stellar, it's because they're staying involved all the time and making sure that that type of communication is handled. If, you know, the thing is with scope creep, here's what happens with scope creep. If you say you decide to do 100 things, and then all of a sudden the client's saying, hey, you know, can you do this? Can you do that? And then the project manager goes, yeah, I can do that. I can do this. I can do that. And they might not know that they're having scope creep. So they need to make sure that as they're chronicling new requirements beyond the original commitment, that those things are being documented. Because when a client says, can you do this and that? You say, oh, you bet I can. It's going to cost you 30% more, and it's going to take 6 weeks longer. Are you good with that? And they're going to say,
or let me scope that out for you, right?
And then you come back and suddenly it's their decision, and they like that.
Right.
Clients hate surprises. So you say, a salesperson should say, I don't know, let me check, go back and meet with the team, and then come back and say, it's going to be 30%, it's going to be 6 weeks. Is that what you still want to do? And they're going to say, that sounds great, or no, I don't want to do that. All through that, the relationship is only stronger now. The salesperson has more credibility. The project manager is relieved and not threatened because they hate doing that. They don't want to do that. They're not equipped for that. They're not trained for that. That's not what they're supposed to do. They need to be troubled.
Yeah, or I've seen it where they go, okay, well, we can do this as phase 2.
Right. You leave the decision to them. And then again, the project manager just isn't equipped for that type of a discussion. And at least in my experience, and they shouldn't be. They're supposed to be handling the day-to-day, making sure that what the company is committed to is happening and being communicated back to the client. And then, you know, that's all really important. But that's why I think a really good salesperson should stay involved in day-to-day, or at least week-to-week communication with the client and internally.
Yeah. So let's talk about conflict, because I've definitely seen where, on both sides, right, where an account manager, maybe they don't understand this concept, and a business development, and maybe the owner isn't as clear with this company philosophy, which is a miss, right? It should be very clearly communicated that this business development person, the expectation is they stay involved. Sometimes it's not clearly communicated like that. So there's conflict because the account manager or the project manager says, why is this business development person still involved? Wants them to get out, thinks they're asking too many questions, just thinks they're another layer involved, thinks that they're just trying to get more money, whatever it is, right? I've definitely seen those conflicts. And then on the other side, I've seen it where it is clear that the business development person is supposed to stay involved, and they don't, right? And they have a comp plan that pays them for it. And to your point, there's all these changes and they don't even know about it, right? Because they're doing whatever, they're off, you know, trying to land another account or whatever. And so, I mean, what have you done in those kind of situations and that you've seen?
Well, in the first scenario that you talk about, you have a salesperson that is, a salesperson needs to read the room, right? And if they're in a technical environment and the project managers and engineering team from his or her company is involved, it might not be appropriate for that person to start speaking and committing to things. They need to wait for the opportunity for them to speak or for them to participate, and to assume otherwise is your salesperson isn't doing a very good job at that point. The salesperson's whole job is to understand what everybody's saying and be a translator. So if they're in a room with 20 people and 19 people are saying different things, a salesperson needs to understand what everybody's saying. and nobody cares what the salesperson's saying. A salesperson doesn't have anything to do with it. Their job is to translate, in my humble opinion. So,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that it's a salesperson that is stepping on everyone's toes and being pushed out. That salesperson isn't doing a very good job, and a client shouldn't ever want them to leave because they should be seen as an advocate. I worked at
yeah.
Sanmina, and Sanmina is a very difficult company to work for. And really, most of my job when I was working for Sanmina was I was an advocate for my clients within this giant, big, mean company. And so to be that liaison between my gentle, loving client and my big, mean monster company I'm working for, that's a challenge, right? That takes a
Yeah.
special skill. And you know, my sales people would become indispensable to our clients because that liaison is really important, especially when you're dealing with a big, complex organization with a complex thing that's being manufactured or sold. It's very interesting. So the first scenario, you have a
Yeah.
lousy salesperson in that environment, at least in my opinion. And what was the second part of that? I'm sorry.
So I think on the second part it was more, let me think about, so on the first part where it's either a lousy salesperson or the
Yes.
culture, right, where the owner isn't communicating, where and then the second part was where the salesperson just isn't staying involved
Oh,
at all.
right. Yeah, that is also a problem, right? Uh, a salesperson, the greatest thing that a salesperson has is his or her word. And so if I, as a salesperson, come in and make commitments for my company, that's why when I was at Sanmina, most of my job was making sure that the commitments that I would make were being adhered to because I'm concerned about my word and my
Hmm.
reputation. So if the salesperson doesn't care or isn't involved, again, you got another lousy salesperson. So I want to make sure that what I commit to is being adhered to. And here's another important thing, Jill, about a salesperson, right? If a salesperson is going to call on a client and the client says, "I need you to do this, can you do it?" They need to say, "That's a great question. Let me jot that down. I'll go check." Right? I'll go
Right,
check. Then
right,
they go
absolutely.
home or they go to their home office and they present it to the personnel within the organization. And then they say, "Gosh, we can't wait." And you say, "Great, when can you do it?" And then they'll say, "It's going to take us
Right.
8 weeks." And you say, "Really? 8 weeks? That's really aggressive. Are you sure?" And then the salesperson needs to make sure that they're comfortable and that they know that what they're about to go communicate to their new client can be adhered to. And, because it's that person's name on the line. So if Sally goes running back into her client and says, "Yes, we can do this. It's $1 million. It's going to take 8 weeks and we can't wait." Well, she needs to make sure that what she just said actually happens. So that conversation's over. It's an
Right.
hour. Then she spends the next 8 weeks back at her office making sure that everybody does what they said they're going to do. And that means every single day, if necessary, communicating with the team that committed. You're still on track. You're still on track. You're still on track. And if it's 4 weeks in and they're not on track, Sally needs to go charging back to her client and say, "Hey, you know what? It's really 12
Yeah.
weeks. We miscalculated. Don't go back at 8 weeks and say we miscalculated." So
Right.
I could go on all day, Jill. So,
Yeah, yeah,
so that's,
yeah. So we've talked about benefits, obviously. We've talked about the
yeah.
gotchas, of where things can go astray. I think the last thing that I a lot of times hear that is the issue is the financial concerns, right? The
Yeah.
ROI on this. And that is getting into sensitive subjects of what's a typical comp structure that you've seen in this type of scenario? Does the business development person still get paid on change orders and or do they just get changed on, I've had scenarios where they only get paid on developing new departments within that current
hmm
account.
Well, that's really interesting. It just depends on what type of an environment that the salesperson is calling on. if they're dealing with a company that the product life cycle of the product that the client is selling is really short, that's a different compensation package than something that's
Right.
really long. So if you're calling on Hewlett Packard as an
Right.
example, and they're doing test systems, that's a long cycle. That whole sales cycle is really long on the front end, and then it'll chunk along for years on end once they start manufacturing product. So it just depends.
Right.
My experience is that, I mean, I've dealt with this a lot, and people think
Yeah.
that a salesperson needs to be motivated by keeping the carrot just out of reach, and so they'll set up a commission structure as an example that there's a degradation over time, right? You get 4%, and then
Yeah.
after 6 months it goes to 3, and then it goes to 2, and I think that's a terrible idea. I think it's incredibly short-sighted, and that's typically used, Jill, in the environment that we were talking about in the beginning of our conversation, where you want a hunter, and that hunter's job is to go and find new accounts all the time, and that's all they do.
Yeah.
So I don't like that
Yeah.
environment. That's what that's used for, and I think it devalues the salespeople on a human level. I really don't like it at all. So, and I don't think it
Yeah.
works.
I think that you bring up a really good point as far as in that compensation structure, really thinking through what do you want the outcome to
That's
be,
right. That's right.
right? Because the behaviors will happen from the compensation plan that you put
Right.
in place,
That's right.
especially for
Right.
salespeople,
Yeah.
right? They will look at that compensation structure if you change it every year or every other year and figure out, okay, what do they want me
That's
to
right.
do, right? And so I think that that's an important piece. And then the other thing that I a lot of times hear about is my company can't afford to have this extra person just stay at that
Mm-hmm.
company, right? And I need them, if I'm going to hire them, a top line person, I need them to go to other companies. I can't have them just, have three really big companies and expect them to, I typically will tell them, but there's so much work that can be done once, like you said, once you open that
Right.
company. Sometimes I've had companies that have taken 12 years to get into just because they're so
Absolutely.
large. But then they're millions of dollars every year for an annuity of 15 plus
That's
years.
right.
So the work was
That's
worth
right.
it. Yeah. So just as a business owner, talking to another business owner, what would your feedback
Well,
be?
I mean, I see it the same way that you do on that. I really don't have anything to add. I think that it's you know it just depends on, again, what you're selling. But I do think that the
Mm-hmm.
that expansion of the relationship within an organization is really, really important, as we've touched on. And then it is important to make sure that your salespeople are focused and not getting lazy. So if they have 3 accounts that are there, that's where they spend 80% of their time. That's great. They still need to have those prospects ahead of them, right? That's important as well. So you
Mm-hmm.
need to keep that and measure them against progress. So as a business owner, or as a VP with numerous people reporting to me, I want to make sure that they've got their eyes on the horizon and they're looking for new things that are coming. I don't want to hear from the market that your biggest client is about to have a big acquisition, and that's going to, or they're going to be acquired.
Right.
I want to hear from my salesperson. They need to be deep within them,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting. One of the things that I was calling on Cisco, and I'll never forget it. It was in the '90s, right? And it was I was so frustrated after a year of calling on them, and I was dedicating my life. I was going to get in there, and I went to my boss on Christmas Eve, And I said, Jim, oh my God, boo hoo hoo, I feel bad for myself. And his response, I won't even say on your podcast, but it was basically, tell them we don't want their business, and I'm just going, what? That's not the answer I want.
No.
And then really what we did
yeah.
instead is, it's a pretty multifaceted company we're working for. I went in finally and I told them my frustration, and they said, we're reducing our supply base. And my answer at the time was, fantastic, get rid of everybody. I'll do it all, right? And they just couldn't believe it. So be willing to take on more than what's before you, and maybe that's the solution.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that it's always a struggle for the small and medium sized businesses to swallow that pill. But I think, and your point is exactly right. It depends on the size product or service that you're offering. Certainly, right? That it definitely comes into consideration. The length of that sales is definitely important to consider in that conversation. Right. Well, I want to wrap this up. Is there any other points of wisdom that you want to give our listeners?
Well, that's a great question, Jill. I will say that what you just brought up is fascinating to me, where you have a sales cycle that's so long, right? And say it's years, like you were talking about. How do you measure progress? And when you have salespeople that are calling on accounts that the sales cycle is so long. And that's something that I would challenge everybody to think about, because you need to be able to measure your salesperson and reward them as well. And if the reward isn't until years down the road, how do you retain that person and not lose the progress that you've made by having that individual call on a coveted account for a long time? So how do you reward them and keep them motivated? And how do you also recognize whether or not they're doing anything of value, and how do you measure that?
Right.
So, but
yeah, I think definitely, just as a point to that question, CRMs are really important in that piece, even in those long sales cycles, right? To show that meetings have been had, outreaches, centers of influences within those companies, or if you're going to trade shows to try and get to those companies and you've had presentations with those companies. Obviously, a lot of times, if they are larger companies with longer sales cycles, they might have RFPs. How many of those RFPs have you had at bat? There's a lot of metrics that companies can use to see, is this, especially when you're talking about a business development person that is a whale hunter, right? That takes a longer 18-month sales cycle. You still have to figure out what are those KPIs, because you can't just sit back as a company and say, I'm going to invest in this person for 18 months and just pay this huge salary, or even a mid-level salary, and just hope and pray, right? That's not a strategy. Yeah.
Great point.
Yeah. Well, Charlie, thank you so much for being a part of my podcast, Beyond a Deal. And it was a pleasure having you on. This was a topic that both you and I were clearly passionate about, keeping that business development in the front line at a larger account. And it was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much, Jill. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.